And yes, we are indeed live. And I have Brian Sommer. Brian, what's going on?
I'm looking forward to the weekend. How about that? But first, we've
Yeah,
got we've got really brilliant pearls of wisdom to impart to the audience. So the weekend has to wait for an hour. So
I have a feeling that Brian brought the wasabi today. Brian Brian had a long road trip yesterday, and I'm pretty sure he brought some spices. So this should be good. If you're on one of the streams, particularly LinkedIn, please comment so I know you're here and the stream is working. If you need the alternate YouTube link, as always, you can get it. Brian picked a slide that I think implies we're going to slice and dice the subject today. I don't know what was the picture here.
we're going to blow up what everyone thinks about the advice and counsel go to CIOs,
Oh,
and for that we've got a very special guest that'll be on here later. In the middle of the show, Tim
yeah.
Crawford.
All right.
And
So here's our agenda for this show. And as always, you are part of the show. Brian, I went and I put for Tim CIO myth busting because I figure, we got to go viral with this shit. So we better, bust some myths today. Good CIOs, bad CIOs. Anyhow, Tim's gonna set us straight on what's really going on. So that's gonna be fun. Any other comments on our agenda?
Now, anyone who's seen the show regularly knows we have a little fun at the very beginning, real quick, on some of the weird wild buzzwords that are always being created and banded around in the market. You and I are going to each cover, I think, 3 underrated stories of the week. Although this week, I could tell you, I could probably put 12 in there. There's a lot going on. And then we're bringing Tim in for the halftime bit, and that should be pretty interesting. I'm used to seeing Tim in some analyst events, but this will be fun doing this in a much smaller group. And then we've got the usual kind of stuff at the back end, John's favorite whiff of the month, and I've got the what is it? The article, something to inspire. I've got something there to close it out.
Jason, good to see you on the stream. Happy Friday. Looking forward to your salty commentary as we go.
No,
This should be good.
Trenchant commentary.
Trenchant indeed. All right. Well, trenchant's a high bar, Jason. Let's see how you do. Let's go to the buzzwords, Brian.
I saw a fascinating. There were a bunch of stories this week talking about, or this month, about maybe some of this AI stuff isn't exactly working the way we thought it was. And I saw this one blurb, probabilistic incoherences, or incoherencies, whatever. And I thought, wow, that's got to be the buzzword of the month right there. And it made me, as I'm reading this deal, I was just chuckling because there was a story that came out earlier this week that was right down this path. And it's in a subject I love, which was if you fed an AI-powered applicant tracking or applicant scoring system with, say, 1,000 applications, and you asked it to find and rank the top 10 applicants, if you ran it, it would give you a list using many of the major AI tools. That if you ran it again, like 2 minutes later, it gave you a different top 10 candidate list and so forth. And every time you ran it, the list kept changing, which goes to point out that this stuff's not, anyone who wants to delude themselves thinking that AI is this incredible deterministic rules-driven kind of tool. Boy, that test failed. And I can't wait for lawyers to bring that study into courtrooms to point out why employers and software developers may be culpable for the results AI tools generate.
Indeed. Well, let's try to avoid probabilistic incoherencies on today's show, Brian.
I'm not betting on it. The odds are not in your favor. But anyway.
And with that, I'm going to my top stories. And the first one comes via Esteban Kolsky of Constellation. For those of you who haven't been tracking, Esteban has basically been heading up board level research initiatives inside of Constellation and regularly issuing missives, and more of those are going public now. So you can check out the most recent month with his video review, which I thought was quite good. He came up with a series of conclusions that you can see, some of them on the slide, but I'll share a few of them with you. I think these are really interesting because I really like the challenge of trying to boil down everything that goes down in an enterprise month into a handful of biting lessons to jolt thinking. So some of his this month include public frontier models alone do no longer differentiate. Context, privileged data, and homegrown models win. Tech spending is separating from economic caution. Invest in data readiness, security, governance, and infrastructure. And then another one that I loved, talent is the hardest constraint. Experienced people who can navigate ambiguity and apply judgment matter most. I think this is really interesting, and obviously you can dig deeper into his takes on all of this. Why don't you see us on LinkedIn? I don't know. It's streaming both Brian and mine, so who knows? But Jason sees us on LinkedIn, so anyway, you're on YouTube. Glad to see you on YouTube, Thomas, and I see your comments, so it works either way. So thanks for being here. Yeah, we may have a weird issue with the LinkedIn stream, but Jason, you seem to be on it. Let me know if we're having any problems there. Thank you. Okay.
By the way, in case Esteban, I know a number of you know him, we did not add that red.
The red thing on his nose. Yeah.
That came.
Yeah. That was YouTube's satirical touch. Just real quick, I added a little bit of commentary in my weekly on this, on hits and misses. I talked about how you still need a talent pipeline for junior roles, even if those skills needed for those roles are changing. Not hiring juniors would be a critical mistake. And we're starting to see the emergence of, I think, some interesting new models around how to handle that. I refer to it as a mutual mentorship model where younger, tech-fluent, talented folks challenge stale processes, but also learn domain knowledge. And yes, there's still important domain knowledge in all of this. So anyhow, something to think about that I think comes into the talent conversation. And then I talked a bit about that the types of data AI architectures that are winning are more affordable in the long run, as in, appropriating smaller models and things like that, but not necessarily simple to manage or maintain. Just because Cisco's doing that doesn't mean all companies can pull that in-house. So if your teams aren't ready to deal with issues like model drift, agentic loop monitoring, and context rot, how's that for buzzwords, Brian? Then I say you're not ready to beat tokenomics on your own. You may have to work with trusted vendors on that. So just a little bit of caveat that the more like autonomous like version of AI that you control yourself is hard to build. And so I think we have to be a little careful about the hype. See you on LinkedIn, but it did go silent for a minute. Okay, well, let's see what happens. Anyhow, it says we're live. I trust we're live. Let me know if we have problems. Okay, that's story number one. Brian, you want to say anything about any of those bullets, or do you want me to move on to my next?
I just want to add the point somewhere in the middle of those about the broad purpose, large LLMs versus the very specific ones. Esteban's right in that point, in that regard. And I think it's something that needs to be factored in for a lot of companies in their planning process, because you can clearly see the market's going to bifurcate the kind of LLMs out there. Some of the vendors already know this and are recognizing it. There's some great big ones if you want to use for some generic stuff, like for language translation and so forth. That's totally appropriate for that. But the focused ones are going to be where I think huge amounts of incremental value will come to the companies that can get them and harness them. What's going to be fascinating, though, is I read a piece this week where, like the open computing kind of world, we're going to see LLMs maybe move into that kind of space where the price for getting and accessing these things is going to plummet. So that will be one we have to watch. Anyway.
Indeed. All right. Well, we got Tim backstage, so let's press on. My second story was kind of picked with Tim in mind. China models now more than a third of the enterprise market. This pertains to my next story as well, but basically that customers, all things being equal, are going to choose more affordable models, which has big implications for the AI macroeconomy. But that we're not going to talk about that today. This was obviously not an underrated story in the sense that this OpenAI's disconcerted hack of Hugging Face is a major enterprise story, obviously, but I think it's unfolding, so I can't give you a full take since it's kind of going down as we speak in terms of what actually happened. But I do want to hit on a few things that I think are really important here. One is that OpenAI is very, very interested in kind of these extravagant, terrifying scenarios because it's a way of getting attention. And I don't think that's the best way for the modern CIO, for example, who's tasked with this type of security, to think about it. Look, when agents get access to your systems, it's not that different than humans getting access to your systems in the sense that either way, containment is the key. And giving agents broad authorizations inside of your systems is going to cause a problem. I think it's really interesting here how OpenAI shot itself in the foot in two different ways here. First, because Hugging Face was able to combat this attack using Chinese models, an awkward promotion of your competition. And second, when you're looking for enterprise credibility, do you really want people to be terrified of your technology? I would think not. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm not going to try to unpack it in this segment, but what I would say is it's kind of a constant subtext. You can't talk about these issues without reckoning with security, and I'll be shocked if this doesn't come up during our conversation with Tim in some capacity. Brian, any quick comments on that before we get to your stories? Because I want to get to Tim here. So,
no, we'll go.
Okay, on to your stories.
I'll piggyback. I'll piggyback a little bit off of what you just said. This story is not new to me. I interviewed a bunch of folks, I don't know, 6, 8, 10 months ago, whose employers were pushing, cajoling, demanding, dictating that folks use AI. But finally, this piece in the Financial Times, of all pubs, thankfully, really went and called out that all those efforts were not strategic. They weren't focused. They didn't have the kinds of thought in place to where companies were correctly deploying AI to achieve a specific means. They were just shotgunning and spraying this stuff out. I know it's not new, but it was nice to see an article that really coalesced all this together and quantified, if you will, how big a screw up this was. So I was happy to see it. And what to me this tells me is, again, this is another one of these leading indicators that shows that the hype cycle, if you will, or the period of rapid enthusiasm for the tech is starting to hit some headwinds. And I don't know that we're going to necessarily go down totally into the bowels of what do they call that? The trough of disillusionment. But I think some folks are starting to take the rose-colored glasses off and see that some of their initiatives really weren't that well thought out. This actually reflects really badly on managers, believe it or not. But anyway.
Yep. Brian, I would just add real quick that these AI first mandates, I think, are self-defeating. And I think if you focus more on creating a culture of experimentation and give people a governed environment to build interesting things, I think you'll find that they do like using these tools, but not when you impose them on these processes and say, please use our Copilot today and all of that crap. Anyway, on to the next.
This one is another thing that's been bugging me, which is the idea, they call it delayering management. And this article goes through and quantifies who did it and who's behind some of these big, pushes and mandates. Again, this is another one of these things where some high-tech exec had this idea, not necessarily based on solid science or whatever, but there's just this feeling that we have too many middle managers. So let's go take out one of the stories, anecdotes in the article talks about a company that went from 15 layers of management to 8.
Brian, what's up with a graphic? Is that like a thumb on a crushing some poor middle managers in a cube or something?
Yeah, it almost looks like something out of real life. No,
oh my goodness,
I didn't do that. That's part of the article there. But we've got the cart before the horse. We've got companies wiping out layers of management. That's where there's a lot of institutional knowledge, the tacit knowledge that exists in companies. It's where some of the most experienced people, some of the folks who would be brilliant in some of these manager in the middle or whatever, person in the middle kind of roles. And we're just getting rid of them, with no real conscious thought. And somehow companies are supposed to be able to remain successful, and people are supposed to, no one's thought about how people are going to aspire to anything interesting in their career, because middle management really looks like a career death sentence for a lot of folks. And yet, I don't know how they're going to somehow magically go from a cubicle worker who's doing some kind of a task and all of a sudden make it up to top management, unless they spend some time somewhere in the middle and find out how the company really works.
Indeed. I'm going to leave it there because I want to get to our guest shortly. Brian, this one really cheered me up because I've been hollering about this for like 3 years now. Why isn't a vendor using AI to spot toxic bosses? And lo and behold, you found one.
Well, I want to say that I really was in love with this article, but to be fair, I wasn't. And the reason being, they showcased a couple of technologies that are trying to find ways of identifying the bad bosses. So that I want to give big kudos to these companies, these startups who are working on this. Interesting, it's not the large firms, the large like HR companies.
Oh no, it's not those. We know that.
But on the startups, though, they're trying to rely on some information, most of which is trapped inside like an HR system, and they think that's going to give them the clues they need. They'll get some clues. But I've been working on this problem for quite a while. And I know that, for example, I could build an analytic tool that looks at things like, let's look at all the folks who work for Jon Reed, and let's find out when they clock in or log in on their computer, when they log out, at the end of every day. Then I want to see how many hours that consumes all week long. And I want to do that for everybody in the person's organization. Now, if somebody's doing this and all their staff are salaried and they're all averaging like 78-hour weeks, I'm telling you right now, that is the hallmark of a bad manager, somebody who doesn't know how to prioritize work, someone who doesn't know how to bring in the right kind of productivity improvements, and somebody who has no respect for someone's professional and personal balance issues. Now, I could get that data out of time tracking technology, but for some reason, that's just like that one example is one of many I have that a lot of vendors don't even think about because they don't make this a priority. And I have strong feelings on this, but anyway.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about this further, but reminder, we just did a HR Tech blowout show with the show mashup with the Meg and Amy show. So there's a whole hour on HR Tech you can catch on the replay. So with that in mind, I think it's time for our halftime show. Tim, welcome.
Hey guys, good to see you.
Hey, Tim, are you ready to see Brian's bio slide?
I was kind to Tim.
You were kind. Because Brian, you never know what he's going to find on Instagram or whatever.
I will say I found Tim, your name's somewhat common, and when I pulled up on like Google or something images, there were all kinds of Tim Crawfords. None of which look like the Tim Crawford I've run into all the time in analyst meetings. But I actually, for a couple moments, I thought about making a collage of all the different Tim Crawfords out there and ask the audience if they think they can pick out which one you are. Anyway.
Unfortunately, some of those are dead too.
So is this bio legit, Tim? Does this pass muster? Or is this?
It does. It does. It looks good.
Okay.
Thank you for being so kind.
Yeah, man. Yeah, sometimes he really drags up some crazy stuff. So anyhow, I think you did pretty well there. So I do really want to focus in on CIOs and their predicaments and opportunities. But before we do that, I think it's really helpful for folks to understand like how you come at your angle and perspective on all of this, because all of us on this show are in some sense, I guess you could say, independents. And you know you know that you've contributed a lot to my view on that I've written about from an analyst relations perspective. But I always like this sort of thing. My barometer, I don't know about you, Tim, is when I see an analyst raise their hand and I know they're going to get called on, and either my heart sinks or I get excited, you know? And when your hand is up, I'm like, this is going to be good, because I know now when Brian's hand is up, it's like, oh shit, what? When Brian's hand goes up, it's like, crap, like this room could just blow up. But when you raise your hand, it's like, I know it's going to be a customer focused question that pushes the vendor back on the realities instead of the market speak. And how did you arrive at this sort of grounded perspective?
Wow. Now those are some massive shoes to fill.
Yeah.
You're incredibly kind, John, and I always value our conversations, whether in public like this or privately at different events that we travel to all over the place. If you look at it from a background perspective, I come from an operator background. And I guess this is one of the things that is somewhat unique in our space, is that I've walked a mile in those shoes. When I'm talking about some of the challenges that some of these leaders are having, it comes from a position of, I've been there, I've seen that, I've sat in those meetings, I've had to deal with the stress and the opportunities and the excitement and the downsides, the 2 a.m. calls when your network went offline or some application went sideways, and now you're trying to muster your team together to come into the office in the middle of the night and trying to keep all of the frustration at bay. Yeah, it comes from a unique perspective. So one side of it is, I've been there. I've been a customer of many of the companies that I am talking about, that I work with, which is fairly unique. The second piece is, half of the work I do, half of my time is spent with other folks that do that work, that are customers. And so much of my time is spent with other fellow CIOs. So when I'm talking about these issues, it's not just because I read a press release or this is kind of what I've gathered, kind of thinking through it. It's coming from a position of, I've done some of that before. And interestingly enough, some of the things I've done 15, 20 years ago are still incredibly applicable today. That shouldn't be the case, but that is the case. And then the second piece is that I spend a lot of time, whether it's through the different CIO advisory boards that I'm a member of and participate in, and that ranges from like the Wall Street Journal's Technology Council, which I've been on for 5 or 6 years now, to other CIO advisory boards, from VC firms to other organizations. And then on top of that, I have my own CIO think tank that I spun up about a year and a half ago, of forward-thinking CIOs. And the whole idea here was to have a place where they could congregate and have those kind of cone of silence, Chatham House rule conversations without someone listening in that could take that information and use it against them. And so it's the combination of these pieces. And then, of course, like you and Brian, I get the opportunity to engage with the executives and teams at these different vendors and get to see some of that inside baseball, and for good or bad, get to see how the sausage gets made. And so putting it all together is really exciting. And that's the piece that I love kind of delving into.
The challenge of that. Well, let's see how that goes for you on our show today. And the sausage, we may need to spare the viewers from some of the sausage stories, because that vendor sausage is pretty incredible to watch being constructed. Anyhow, my forays into Eastern religion in search of enlightenment taught me that crisis and opportunity are often interwoven and part of the same dimension. So with that in mind, with today's CIO, do you see this as are we at sort of a pressure cooker crisis moment, gut check? Is it more of a career opportunity of a lifetime? Is it somewhere in between? Is it a mix of it all? What are you seeing?
I think if you look at it on the surface and only look at it on the surface, you go, holy cow, like why would you want to be a CIO today? Like it's messy, it's convoluted. It seems like they're just getting pummeled right, left, and center.
We see that, by the way, in our first comment about token bills, which we will get back to. But yeah, good example.
Yeah, and that is a good example. But I think when you look at it on the surface, it's a really challenging place to be. For those of us that are thinking about the big picture and thinking about the role of the CIO and the importance of the CIO, and have walked a couple miles and around a few blocks in those shoes, this is absolutely the best time to be an IT leader. Absolutely the best time. I mean, in my 30 plus years of working in IT in different capacities, mostly in large enterprise, this is absolutely the best time. And I went through distributed computing, the internet, the .com, virtualization, cloud, went through all of those phases. And I will tell you that now is the best time. So yes, on the surface, it may look messy. It may look like maybe it isn't the best time, but when you get down to the core of it, it is. And those folks, those CIOs that understand that broader perspective, right, left, and center, they would agree. They would absolutely agree. There's some stuff we got to work through. It's not all pretty. I often say we're on a path. We're on a journey, and that journey is filled with roses. And you can focus on the rose petals and the smell of the roses, but you have to realize there are a couple of thorns along the way too. And that's where we are today.
Brian, I got a couple of viral hot seat questions for Tim, but before I move into those, where's your head at in this conversation? What do you want to talk about?
I want to know what he thinks are some of the biggest impediments in this primrose path that he's painting out there for CIOs. Because I got to believe there are CIOs who are getting caught by surprise on things, whether it's, token bills they never saw coming at, or it's from pressure from CEOs and board members who know a little bit about AI, enough to be dangerous, but are, trying to force mandates down where there's no plan. And so what are two or three kind of things that are big minefield problems for CIOs that the mindful ones are on top of and know what's about to happen?
Yeah, and just a plug for those of you that don't subscribe to my newsletter, CIO in the Know, there's one coming out right after this session that will touch on some of the items that I'm going to bring up here in a little more detail. I think it's a really good question, Brian. And I think one of the things is frankly just the uncertainty of where we are today. There's so much uncertainty around us. It's kind of hard to put your thumb on anything. And that is true from a strategy standpoint, technology, people in organization, culture. All of these factors are kind of up for grabs, and we have to rethink each of them. I mean, it's kind of like you used to say, if you wanted to be in a healthy place as an individual, there's some core aspects to think about, right? Your home needs to be stable, your work needs to be stable, your health needs to be stable, relationships, right? And you could have one, maybe two that are in flux, but the others have to be stable. When you get beyond that, things get a little convoluted and a little uncomfortable, or very uncomfortable in some cases. The problem that we're having right now is we're rethinking everything. So from how we organize to the people that we have on our team, the technology we use, the architectures we use, how we even go through the process of, like I'm talking about this in the newsletter, how we go through the process of budgeting. right? How do you budget? So, I know you were talking about tokens and blowing budgets and AI and whatnot, but how do you budget? And then how do you work through ensuring that your budget for the next year is going to be accurate? We're into Q3 now, right? Of the calendar year. This is about the time that a lot of organizations are starting to think about their fiscal year 27 budgets. They're not submitting them yet, but they're starting to think about what that looks like, talking to their vendor partners, talking to their consulting partners to figure out, okay, these are kind of the projects we're thinking about and what the numbers might look like. The problem is that the pricing is all over the map. And even the quotes that some are getting, and this was kind of mind-blowing. It used to be that you would get a quote from a vendor and it would last for weeks or months. You could count on it for weeks or months, meaning I kind of know it's X. It might go up maybe 5 or 10%, but I have a pretty good idea of what that number is going to look like. The problem we have today is that in some cases, the quotes last days. Now, you can't even if you got a quote, let's just walk through this example for a minute, because it's exemplifying of many different aspects, whether you're talking about people, whether you're talking about technology, whether you're talking about just internal processes. Let's say you've got the budget for buying something that's $1 million. So you're going to spend $1 million with the vendor on a particular product, whether it's licensing, hardware, whatnot. Great. Get the final quote. You've got it in hand. Send it up the line to get the appropriate approvals, get it into procurement, get procurement to issue the PO. That typically does not happen within days within your average enterprise. Yet, in the time that you go through this process, not only has the quote expired, but then the price is increased. And in some cases, increases 50, 200. I even heard one example of 300%. And so the problem with that is now you've essentially blown what you've planned for, and you have to go back and rethink how you approach this whole situation. So that's what I mean when we go through each of these areas, and that's just one area of many, many, many different ones. But that's why we're thinking about things in the current construct of how we've operated in the past. And that's a flawed position to work from. I'm not saying that we should be overly dynamic the way it currently is. I think it's way too dynamic. But we have to find that happy medium.
Thomas wants in on your budget discussion. He's talking about how can you ensure adherence to a budget. I think he's talking largely about all the consumption-based pricing, and then he's saying while in parallel usage is encouraged. The AI adoption pressure cooker. What is your community saying about that?
I mean, Thomas, it's great to see you engaging in the conversation. This is part of the problem, is that on one hand, you want to encourage adoption of innovation. When you see opportunities, you want folks to jump in with both feet and start to adopt and leverage this to their benefit. The problem is at what cost? And so we can't put our thumb on understanding what that true cost is. And this is having other ramifications too that I don't think a lot of people have thought about, which is, again, it shows you how messy the current environment is. So great. We want people to use AI, want them to use it for personal agents, want them to start using Copilot. We spend money on allowing them to use this, start chewing up tokens, but then they hit a wall, or we hit a wall in terms of our aggregate budget that we've spent for that particular effort. Now, what do we do? And so the problem is we can't predict to say, oh, well, we're going to need $500,000 or $1 million or $5 million for this particular effort. We don't have an idea of what that looks like. And so how do you start to understand, here's the outcome that we're going for, and here's the actual number of tokens. Oh, and by the way, tokens aren't tokens because different providers determine tokens differently, and the way you use tokens varies as well. And then, of course, you have pricing differences when you get into contractual negotiations and whatnot. But here's what happens. You start to create this culture where, yes, we want people to be empowered and use artificial intelligence and consume tokens, but this variable token consumption is a problem because it conflicts with how I think about money and budgeting. So now what they're thinking about is, well, what if we brought that usage on-prem? Let's buy some equipment. Let's put it in the data center. Oh, that data center that we shrunk, and that data center that's built for maybe 4 to 10 kilowatts a rack, when if you look at some of these bigger systems, they need like 50 to 100 or more kilowatts a rack. So that's a whole nother discussion. But let's just assume for a minute that you can bring some of this equipment on-prem. Now you run into the problem of costs are going up. So what you budgeted, it's now more expensive. And that's assuming you can get your hands on the technology and get your hands on the technology in a reasonable period of time, not next year or the year after. And so the combination of these factors is now causing CIOs to go, yeah, maybe the right thing to do is to bring it on-prem, but I can't pin down the funding. And even if I could pin down the funding, I can't get my hands on the equipment that I really need to be able to do that. And even if I could do that, I don't have the data center space at that density to be able to accommodate that. So, and maybe we could go to colo, but they have similar issues, and some of them don't even allow liquid on the data center floor. So you run into all of these different challenges you have to work through. The problem with that is that at some point you go, wait a second, this is just too much. It's a bridge too far. It's too many things to have to go through. Let's just leverage the hypervisor and other cloud-based services to be able to do this and put constraints in it that way. So I share this example, and I know it's a little lengthy, but hopefully it gives people listening in an idea of this is just one of many, many, many examples of why this is so confusing and why the nuances matter. Because now, if I can't get all of these different stars to align, I'm forcing myself as a leader to go back and rethink my strategy.
Oh, and by the way, no security incidents, no agentic security incidents while you're trying to figure all that out. So
you just drop that in there, John.
Just toss it in. So Tim, I want to stick with the problem statement for a moment here, and then spend our last time with you a little bit on what the top CIOs are doing to excel. In terms of the problem statement, I was going to ask you what bad CIOs look like, but I think we can all use our imagination there. So I'm going to make it harder for you. Let's take like pretty good, well-intentioned CIOs that sort of understand these trends and their implications, but they're not your top tier, but they're doing as good a job as they can. Where are they screwing up? What are the top 1 or 2 areas where a pretty good CIO still has exposure around this stuff?
Yeah, and it actually kind of harks back to what are some of the struggling CIOs? What's the challenge there? Which is, if you're an IT leader, if you are a director of IT, VP of IT that happens to have the CIO title, but you're not seen as a peer amongst the rest of the ELT, the executive leadership team, and I guess I shouldn't even have to explain that if you truly are operating at that level, but if you're not seen as a peer to the rest of the ELT, that's a problem. Now, a lot of that from my research, and I've spent a lot of time understanding the different traits of different types of CIOs, and I have something like, I don't know what it's up to now, 20 or some odd traits, physical traits of different types of CIOs. And it all started as I was coming up through the organization and wanting to understand, who do I want to model after and what type of CIO do I want to be? And that's kind of where the genesis of this, and then I just kind of carried it on now. But if you are more technology focused first, as opposed to business focused, that's a bad place to be. You have to be business focused. And let me explain what I mean by that, because it's really important. At some point, you'll talk about technology, but most of the conversations you have will not talk about technology. You will be talking about business. You're talking about business outcomes. Business outcomes are not, how do we go faster? How do we modernize? That's not a business outcome. Great, you modernized. Digital transformation, rah, rah, what did we get? I can't tell you how many CIOs lost their job over that one.
Yeah.
Right? But the CIOs that are kind of in that middle ground, the forward-thinking CIOs, what I call the transformational CIOs, they get this. They are a business leader first. They understand their business intimately. They are truly operating as a peer to the rest of the ELT, CEO and the rest of the ELT. The ones that are in that middle ground between the traditional, more technology focused, which is about 70% of CIOs today, are in that traditional space. Only about 15 or 20% are truly transformational today. Then you have this kind of squishy middle ground, and it's a pretty squishy. That middle ground CIO or IT leader, whatever their title might be, could be the senior most person in IT, regardless of title. They have to start moving more toward understanding their business. And there are 3 dimensions that have to move. Number 1 is they themselves have to think more business centric. Understand what the CEO is contending with, what the business objectives are for the CEO and the ELT, and align with that. Number 1. Number 2 is make sure that your organization is equally aligned with the business, that folks, even within the deep recesses of your organization, the most junior person on your team, they understand what they're doing and how that impacts your business. And then the third is work toward the outside perspective. What do other folks outside of IT, how do they view you and your role and the IT organization? When you get those 3 moving, magical things happen. If you miss on one of those, it's really hard. Now, you can, I know CIOs that have done all 3 and they're still struggling. And guess what happens? They get up and leave. And that's an unfortunate step for those companies, because these are good people. They're the right people for you. They made the change, but you're not ready for that. And that's your business.
Let me jump in here. So I track with what you're saying, Tim, and I've certainly seen that historically. We're in a different age, though. And I'll give you an example. You were talking about budgets a couple minutes ago, but in the minds of the rest of the ELT, most departments are going to be allowed to spend similar to what they had the prior year, plus or minus whatever inflation or some business growth.
Yep.
And they're going to look at IT the same way. Unfortunately, there are a lot of new risk and challenges and uncertainties on the IT side that I think are going to put a lot of pressure on these folks to hit a particular kind of budget number. And I'll give you one example. When John had a story up at the beginning of the podcast, he talked about some of these, what happened with one of the big AI companies. And he didn't get too far into describing it, but what was happening is these LLMs can be used to crack passwords and figure out how to break into systems. That's not a threat that we had a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it points out that to the need for more IT groups to develop countermeasures to all kinds of fraud that's coming their way, and synthetic hires and fraudulent resumes, fraudulent freight bills, fraudulent T&E documentation is a real big one now. And yet I don't see any budget being set aside to develop countermeasures, but I got to believe it's important that it be there.
It is. And there's another piece to this, which I alluded to in my most recent post about the OpenAI Hugging Face incident, which is you have to think about the intent first. So when you think about risk, you think about malicious activity, right? We've had cyber teams that have thought about what are all the different ways that someone could compromise our systems. In some ways, we've taken a pretty coarse approach to that, being kind. Meaning we look at the network, we look at firewalls, we look at the traffic, we look at code, we look at applications. But one thing we don't look at really, really well is behaviors. The technology is fairly nascent in this space, but it's something we need to actually double and triple down on, because how do we know that it's Brian or Brian's agent that is doing the work? And how do we ensure that that activity, whether it's Brian or his agent, is actually doing something appropriate? And so I talk about this in the post, where you have to think about the intent, and human behavior has this moral compass. Well, and we could argue, whether that moral compass is broken in some cases, but for conversation's sake, let's say that it isn't broken. There's a human component that says there are things I probably shouldn't do. Technology doesn't necessarily have that same empathetic implication, and we don't program systems to necessarily think about that either. And that's why when you see like the OpenAI Hugging Face example, yes, it created a cyber incident, but it was just trying to do its job. Now, if it were a human trying to do that, it probably would have stopped somewhere along the way and said, I'm not so sure I'm comfortable doing this, right? And so to your point, Brian, is yes, we do have to think about now there are all of these new threat vectors that are coming from things that we couldn't necessarily compromise in the past. Now we can compromise those. And then the second piece is there's ill intent, and then there's also just, I didn't know any better, and I got over my skis and did something I shouldn't,
and deleted my production database.
Right.
Yes.
Well,
yes, exactly.
Right. And so this is part of the change in thinking is we have to think more holistically than we have in the past. We can't think as simplistic, and we've had a luxury of being able to do that for a long time. But those days are behind us.
Right. And I'm about to write an article about this, but the thing is that I think we overlook a little bit in the hype of all of this. Like, so for example, like the guardrail discussion is important. And, in the case of Hugging Face, they had a problem there because they were trying to defend against the attack with LLMs. They had guardrails that thought they were trying to do a malicious hack when they were just trying to defend themselves. And so they were ultimately only able to counter the attack by using a Chinese model without guardrails that allowed them to get the response to the code they needed to input. It's a fascinating situation because it indicates that A, these machines are amoral, but two, look at everything the CIO has to know and be responsible for. If that happened to your organization, would you be able to do that? Would you be able to, like Hugging Face are experts in these things? Would you be able to switch and say, we can't use the frontier model for that, but we can use this model for that, and then we can defend ourselves with that? I mean, that is one hell of a moving target. And I think we're back to this thing that I talk about of the paradox of IT leaders, where ultimately I think you have to be deeper in the weeds than ever before, but you also have to be able to speak in business terms like never before. And I've always been struck by what you do at these analyst conversations where I'm geeking out on this AI talk because I want to understand this tech. And then you're popping in with business outcomes and you're the CIO guy. And I'm like, wait, the CIO guy wants to talk about business outcomes. This is a change, right? So it's fascinating to see this shift in real time where you can't let go of the tech stuff at all, but man, you better be able to talk in terms the business understands or you're screwed.
That's right. But let's pick that apart a little bit, because I think for folks listening in, it's important to understand the nuances in what you just said. The CIO needs to understand the business aspects, full stop. That's no longer an option. And if you're not working in an organization that is expecting that of their CIO, that organization, I'll just be frank, most of those organizations are doomed, because technology plays such an impactful role in every single business across industries. So you have that disconnect. The CIO needs to understand business. And I don't just mean if you're the CIO of Gap that you understand that the company sells shirts and pants and whatnot, and they happen to use contract manufacturing. What I mean is you understand things like the total round trip of, we found a flaw in a product. How do we get those insights, get it back into design, out to contract manufacturing, back through the different distribution channels, and back into the customer's hands? What's the round trip on that? What's the cost associated with doing it? What are our options if we run into geopolitical instability in Indonesia and have to home to different manufacturing facilities and all the networking and technology and everything that sits below it? I mean, the thing that most people don't understand is you can't just simply say, oh, you know what? We're going to have to move from this country to another country. We've got some extra equipment here in the US in our headquarters. Let's just ship it out there and it'll go to use. No, because you run into everything from not just power requirements, but even warranties and support. And so IT is really complicated. And this is why it's really important to have those deep conversations, John, that you often get into when you geek out, which I love. But it's important for the CIO to make sure that they are surrounded with a team of people that can help do some of that translation, because no one person can be expected to do it all.
Brian, wardrobe malfunction. All right. Real time adjustments is the name of our game. Okay, so Tim, here's the rule for your exit. You have something at the top of the hour, so you need to go soon.
Yep.
I'm going to let Brian close it out with his final rejoinder to you or question, and then you can respond, but it's down to you how soon you need to leave and how quick your response needs to be. That's going to be your choice. So, Brian, close us out with Tim.
So a fast question, I think, with a fast answer. I drove by a data center last night that was one of the new ones being constructed all over the country. It went 3 miles down this one road. And I have to think that CIOs are going to be pressed to provide more insight into what they're thinking about on ESG kinds of requirements for all of this new compute power that's coming up. If they didn't talk about it in the past, what are they going to, how do they get smart on this kind of stuff and be prepared to handle it? And are they going to change their vendor selections to deal with something a bit more environmentally friendly?
Yeah, you really want to talk about a political hot potato, don't you? I love that.
Yeah,
you know me, Tim.
I love
Tim,
it.
take your stand on data centers, Tim. Come on, man.
No, I was on the board of Data Center Pulse. I've been involved in and around data centers my whole career, both within corporate data centers as well as co-location facilities, secure and unsecure facilities. So I've seen it all. I've been through semiconductor manufacturing and the data centers that are involved with those. So I've seen a lot of different variables. I think the conversation around data centers right now is incredibly fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I kind of dropped a little hint there of a lot of these data centers that exist in the world today are not designed to support AI. And you can't just say, oh, let's just add some more power to it or more cooling to it. In some cases, you literally have to take the entire data center down to the dirt and rebuild it, because it also can't take the weight. The foundation can't take the weight of the equipment, density. I think but back to your question, Brian, I think the issue for CIOs when it comes to data centers and ESG and sustainability, which ESG and sustainability today, and I'm going to make a bit of a political statement here, today are somewhat terms that are not being discussed because of the current political climate. And a lot of that is going to change. I mean, when you look at it on a global scale, that's not the case. If you go to Europe, for example, it absolutely is part of the conversation. It's part and parcel, part of the conversation. And I think we are going to see more folks get it back to be front and center as part of the conversation as we start to think about natural resources, whether that be power or water consumption of these data centers. And yes, I see the stories about, oh, data centers don't need all that water and whatnot. Sure, if you can go fully centralized, complete enclosed cooling systems, and you need nothing more. But that's not the reality of where we are today. And so it's important to understand that topics like ESG and sustainability as a CIO, and I've had this conversations with groups of CIOs and continue to have it, which is you may not choose to talk about it publicly, but you better darn well be thinking about it as part of your strategy and part of your planning, because once we get through different political cycles, this will come back, and it will come back in spades. And even if it weren't for the political aspects, and you could say politics could be administrations changing, it also could be that communities are changing. I mean, we just saw New York put a moratorium on data center buildouts. New York is where a large concentration of data centers currently reside. So I do think that this is something that CIOs have to think about. And now with AI, oh, by the way, we can now start to understand what is the ESG impact and sustainability impact of a given company that we are investing in. That was really hard and very opaque in the past, even if the company did not produce the results. There's a story, and I think you had kind of touched on this in one of your opening comments before I joined the show. But there's a story of a company which I will leave unnamed because they chose to become unnamed after they did a lot of amazing work. Big company came out in the data center space and said, we have the ability to be able to do amazing efficiency in data centers. We can show you how we are moving to free air cooling, how we are getting incredibly more efficient in these facilities, and then others can benefit and learn from that. The problem is Greenpeace came out and used that as a total buzzkill, and because it was a well-known company, and used it as part of their propaganda to maybe rightfully so, but because it was a well-known company, came out and said, oh, look, they're doing this and they could do better. And so they focused on the negativity aspect of it, unfortunately. What that did is it caused that company to go underground and say, I'm sorry, we would love to help the community out, but we're no longer going to produce this because we're getting pummeled in doing so. I do think all of this to say we need to be more transparent about it, and we need to be sharing what we're doing, and amongst the community be able to say, okay, look over everybody's shoulders and let's figure out how we do this together, because we all benefit from it, both personally as well as professionally in our businesses. So that's kind of a long-winded way to answer your question, Brian, but to say ESG, and it's not just sustainability and natural resources of data centers, but it's also about silicon. It's about consumption of natural resources to produce this equipment. It's about e-waste. All of that comes into play. Humans. So now we have humans that have to do these long commutes, and what are they contributing to the footprint? There's a lot of data that we have not been able to kind of get our arms around. And now if you start to put your arms around it by using AI, because AI is really good at bringing that data to light, we might make some very, very different decisions. And that's why I think things like ESG and sustainability have got to come back into the public conversation more broadly.
Well, Tim, we're not out of topics, but we're out of time. If we were at an event, we'd be grabbing some sketchy
and
food.
I had more questions.
Yeah, we'd be grabbing some sketchy food and continuing, but you got a hard stop. So why don't you head out now? Brian and I will wrap the show. Thanks a lot for all that discussion.
Thanks, guys. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
So, Brian, that was a lot there. A whole lot. I feel like I want to talk more about the sustainability part of this, but just in brief, like, because that's probably deserving of a whole show. But the idea that you can't talk about this without getting political is just so ridiculous, that we can't have an open conversation about energy consumption. I just don't have any patience for that. Like, let's have the conversation. But second, like, the idea of monitoring energy consumption in real time to improve your bottom line, like, that's not political. That's just being smart. And if you have your head buried in the sand because of PR and you can't have that conversation internally, then I feel bad for you as an organization. Anyway, gasket partially blown.
As a guy who wrote a book on ESG, I'll agree with you on that. And I found myself having to tiptoe through some discussions, and even when I did a lot of public speaking gigs as part of that book, and one of the things I'd start off almost every talk with is, I'm not going to talk about politics, and I'm not going to let us get into that. Let's just talk about how this stuff can impact, firms on a good and bad basis, and let's go from there.
Yeah, well, we're almost out of time, Brian. There was a lot to digest there from Tim's conversation, and I think that was really good. Man, I still have a whole lot more we could talk about there, but I think we got a good window into at least the challenges that CIOs are facing. So that was good.
So let's go to the next agenda item.
And
We
by
got two
the
things
way,
left.
Chris, your point's going to have to return to them because you're right that there's a lot of work to be done on governance. I'm not sure that it's just at the database level, by the way, but that's absolutely part of the picture. And one of the key points that I made around the security thing is that preventing lateral movement from agents is fundamental, and that's part of the picture too. I have an article coming out about that. So, Brian, let's go to these slides. We're going into my whiff, aren't we?
I believe so.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, John's whiff of the month. And
Yeah.
I know John really wants to tell us all about his experience with dating non-existent graphical women type things on the internet. But sounds like you're not going to be able to use those in China, John. I hate to
I'm
break it to you.
disappointed. My avatar is not going to get past customs. It's very, very disappointing. I do want to point out that the best thing about avatar-based relationships is that humans are very complicated and needy, as I said, and this has been a great alternative. And I'm just so sorry that I'm not welcome in China anymore. So, oh man, life always has its curveballs, Brian. And with that, I want to also thank the audience for your comments. Sorry, we had a couple issues on the LinkedIn stream, but thank you for persevering and giving us some good questions for Tim there in the middle of all that. And Brian, are you guys ready for this? Because this, if you've seen our show before, the last slide is something inspirational, and it's usually Brian's dog that inspires us. But Brian, this time we got a different kind of dog. We got like a DOGG kind of dog. Are you ready for this guy?
Oh yeah,
Oh
the
my
consulting
God.
bro. I saw this image on LinkedIn, and I actually stopped and read every word on there. I've seen this kind of clown get on planes all the time.
He's headed towards your project, man.
Oh yeah, ready to bill at $1,000 an hour and deliver at $0 per hour in value.
Could he be a forward deployed engineer? I love that with his like cinnamon latte. Oh my God.
Yeah, I love his teeth are brighter than a 2,000 watt light bulb. He's got all the trappings: the Toomey rollerboard, the cup of designer coffee in his hand. He's already got the building lanyard out and ready, along with a neck pillow. This guy's prepared for anything, and yet it's guys like that take an extra 10 minutes to get settled in on a plane because they're packing so much junk.
Jason likes the bro code. Yeah, man. I'd love to hear some last minute comments in the chat about how being a consulting bro has helped your career. I would like to keep an open mind.
I'd love to see
this guy looks toxic. This guy looks toxic to me, though.
I just want to know if anybody can think of something this guy forgot to pack and bring along. The amount of junk that's displayed on here that somebody drags onto a plane. I did make a comment I think it was to John earlier in the week, that what the guy needed were all those stupid like pull drawstring things that hang down on the back of backpacks and stuff. Because you always got to have somebody gets on a plane, has got 8 or 10 of them on the back of their bag, and they just go spinning around in the aisles and knocking the daylights out of poor people that are already seated. Anyway,
no code, low code, pro code, and bro code. Indeed,
Jason, that's the quote of the day right there.
So all I'm saying is, next time you see the phrase forward deployed engineer, which I suspect you'll see within 24 hours on LinkedIn,
yeah,
hopefully the image of this guy flags up as a cautionary tale. This is not the person that I would want to see when I clocked in on my enterprise project. But anyhow, hey, at least, Brian, the only thing I'll say is good is at least we've gone from a whole school bus full of consultants to just the one toxic bro. So at least there's an improvement there. Do you remember the old cartoon that had the whole bus, and then
and
then all the kids came out of the bus? with all the little bow ties on and stuff, and they were your I don't want to use your ex firm's name, but there were a bunch of firms like that rolled out the old welcome wagon back in the day.
Yeah, I know those kind of stories. The one thing and as a guy who spent a long time in that world, when I saw that image, I went through there looking at it going, oh my God, how many of these have I done? And I sat there going, well, I've never had a cup of coffee. That's one. I've never had a neck pillow. That's two. And when I was going down the list of a lot of the bill of materials for the tech bro there, and I'm like, I know I have rollerboard. I've never owned a Toomey. I'm sure they're outstanding, but I'm lucky to get a suitcase to last. A rollerboard lasts 12 to 18 months. They just take so much abuse or they get broken. I actually watched one of my suitcases fall out of a plane, and it cracked to smithereens. And I saw another one, a whole bunch of us, they didn't have a gate for our plane, so they parked us out an air cargo and brought a staircase. And we all had to get out of the plane, like 10, 12 people at a time. And this guy's looking down at the floor and looking at this rollerboard of mine. And then he's looking back at the plane. He does it like 3 times. He said, did you have a duffel bag of the same material? And I go, yeah, why? He goes, it's behind the wheel set. And on the left rear wheel set of the 737, there was my bag like a wheel chalk sitting there. And I go running to...
Wow, that's a high utility item, huh?
Yeah, I fight my way up to the front of this shuttle van. I tell the driver, like, call the baggage guys, because I'd seen they'd emptied the plane and were gone. I go, that's my bag behind the wheels. Anyway, he calls, nobody does anything. And sure enough, when the bags are already out down there in baggage claim, I go to look for my bag. It's not there. I go talk to the lost bag guy, and he goes, oh, did you say it's like that bag? I go, yeah, but it's a duffel. And he goes, hold on a minute. He gets on his radio and he calls out the baggage people. They went out where that jet was, and the jet had been backed up over my bag. And I had a can of shaving cream in that duffel bag, and it got flattened. Everything got, spewed out in there. But the whole bag, I'm not kidding you, John, wasn't 3/8 of an inch tall, and it had these big, they're like linear grooves where the, instead of normal tire tread, but those were the airline tire tracks that went right over my bag. Anyway, I want to say a big thank you for that anecdote, Mr. Airline Executive. I hope they do that to your bag someday.
And thanks everyone for joining the latest edition of John and Brian's Corporate Travel Misadventures. I hope you enjoyed the extended anecdotes. There's more where those came from. Please let us know which ones you want us to cover next time, because we have got a lifetime of travel incidents at your disposal. That was just I can assure you from talking with Brian that's just the beginning, but that's just a teaser of our new show and our new format, Brian. Sponsored by Southwest.
Tech Bro Gets Screwed, the new flying travel podcast. All right, well, we need to, I think, say goodbye to all these guys.
Yeah, we're done. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you next month. I'm gonna skip a few weeks on video, so I'll catch you for the next Enterprise Month in Review probably later in August. Thanks everyone.
Thanks everybody.